of IPPH on Air. IPPH, the Institute of Politics, Policy, and History, housed on the campus of the University of the District of Columbia, with the mission of rediscovering the history of Washington, D.C., while drilling down on touchstone issues of the day, issues that have perennially plagued our nation. And so, because of the consequential nature of this election cycle, IPPH on Air is hosting a 1-month special election series. And so every Monday at 3 p.m., we have State of Play with essentially the distinguished co-anchors of today. And then later in the week, we host a podcast featuring interviews of experts on prior presidential elections, constitutional law, should someone challenge the outcome of the election, as well as voter registration and intelligence. And so today, we have as our co-anchors, Karen Tramontano. Karen was the former Deputy Chief of Staff to President William Jefferson Clinton. She is an international political analyst and co-chair of the IPPH Senior Advisory Committee. Welcome, Karen.
Thank you, Mayor.
And we have as well the Reverend Mark Thompson. Mark is the host of the podcast Make It Plain, a regular on MSNBC, and also a distinguished member of the Senior Advisory Committee of IPPH. Thank you for being here, Mark.
Happy to be here again, Mayor.
So we had sort of a nail-biting experience over the last few days, but nonetheless, out of it came the election of who is now President-elect Joe Biden and Kamala Harris as Vice President-elect. Would you say they have a mandate, Karen?
Yeah, I think they do. We're talking about 75 million voters, actually over 75 million voters, historic turnout. And in any other context, in any other year, this would be just overwhelming. President-elect Biden achieved over 50%. That hasn't happened in a recent election. The vote was not anywhere near as close as it was in 2016. And people thought Trump had a mandate, and it wasn't, it was far above the results of our sort of closest election in modern times, which would have been the Bush and Gore election, which the difference was like 1,700 votes in one state. So other than the media's obsession on division and the media's obsession on the 70 million votes that President Trump received, I think, yes, this is an overwhelming, and not just popular support. The president-elect will have over 300 electoral college votes. So I do think there is a mandate here.
Do you share that opinion, Mark?
I think I do, although the temptation, even for me, is to think of mandate, raw numbers, number of states, numbers, number of votes. I agree with Karen, though, when you're over 50%, which is very unusual, that is probably as close to a mandate as you're going to get. But I would also think the mandate is somewhat subjective too, not just about the election numbers. Aren't all presidents supposed to unify and heal the country? And so I think whomever would be elected should do that. And I think that's precisely why we're in the predicament we're in, is that the last president elected in 2016 refused to do that. He will probably never admit that he lost because he refused to do that. So I think at the very least, and I think the Biden-Harris ticket has been saying this very profoundly, that this is about healing, that this is about unifying the country. There is no institution, be it a country, be it a business, be it a political party, be it a household, that can continue to function and thrive with the division and dissension that has been created in America over the past 4 years. So I think that at the bare minimum, a mandate exists to heal and unify.
Well, that makes a lot of sense, especially given the percentage, as Karen pointed out, over 50%. Nonetheless, we did have a very divisive 4 years. And while President Trump may have been a gamble in 2016, people had a chance to experience him over the last 4 years, and he actually got more votes. Not enough to win the election, not anything quite like what President-elect Biden got, but he got more votes in 2020. What does that portend? And how should we interpret that? Mark?
Well, as you and I discussed offline last week, Tuesday was actually very troubling for me. Of course, I think we all are comforted by the outcome and there finally being a declared president-elect. But Tuesday was troubling no matter what, because so many millions of people, many millions more, voted for such a divisive figure who has done nothing but display racism and homophobia and xenophobia and misogyny throughout his tenure. It's very troubling that many millions of people would vote for him. And it says a lot about how much more work needs to be done. And, you know, as I was saying to you, Mayor, it's troubling that people would vote for white supremacists like Donald Trump, but then to vote for white supremacists who is not doing anything to prosecute a pandemic that is killing some of his own. You know, I mean, we know white supremacists that wouldn't allow people to die in a pandemic, but he even does that. So that makes it even more stark and troubling. And that's why the mandate issue is still a little difficult for me, because so many people voted for Donald Trump. We have a lot of work to do to get back to the way things were before 2016, where at least the country was seemingly more unified and seemingly more harmonious. We've got to get back to that, and the work is cut out for us.
Okay, Karen, how do you interpret the 70 plus million votes that Donald Trump captured?
So I agree it's troubling, but I want to be cautious that we don't turn that 70 million into a monolith, that 70 million, those 70 million people do not become 70 million Trumps. Because I don't think that's who those people are in terms of all 70 million of them. And, you know, exit polls they're noisy, but there was one data point that I think is interesting. That point was that 30% of the people who voted for Trump voted because of who he is. So now that's troubling, because 30% is giving us something over 20 million people who are voting for someone who is a racist, who is xenophobic, who is homophobic, who is mean, and who will allow people to die on his watch. So that is troubling. But I think we do need to do a lot more work. But we also need to do some work to understand where those other 40 million are. I think we had a situation where, you know, the economy was beginning to improve, and the vast majority of people that voted for Trump, their number one issue was the economy, and their number one fear about Joe Biden was he was going to shut the country down again. So, you know, I think, again, we've got to be cautious not to put everybody in the category of Trump. Because I do also think that if we do that, it's going to be really hard to heal as a nation. Because once we categorize people in this place of hate, and we do that with just half of our country, it's going to be hard to come back from that. And that is not denying that there is racism, homophobia, misogyny, and anti-immigrant sentiment throughout throughout his electorate, and he just stirs the pot on that for sure.
No, I think that those are very appropriate observations, because can you imagine you're a restaurateur? I mean, people who are really frightened of continuous shutdowns, though some aspect of may be needed. So yes, I'm certain that had to be an element. What about the lawsuits, nonetheless, that the Trump campaign is pursuing? Rudy Giuliani had a press conference, I think, yes, on Saturday, in an odd venue, but nonetheless, is there any merit to those lawsuits, especially talking about Pennsylvania?
So I think these lawsuits are a message opportunity for Trump. For any of these lawsuits to prevail, they need two things, right? You need an actual legal claim. And it also has to affect the outcome. And in some of these suits, like the one in Georgia, was over 50 votes. It was dismissed, but 50 votes would not have affected the outcome. Pennsylvania, it was about getting the observers closer to, who was reading the votes. So, as they say, there's no there. But it does, the disturbing part of this is it it provides a message opportunity for Trump to talk about fraud and the election being stolen. Not to mention, tactically what the Northwestern states did, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, in forcing the so-called Trump vote to come out, and then for the other ballots to be counted that were perfectly legal. But that provided another message opportunity. So, I think the worry here is not the lawsuits, because I don't think they're going anywhere. But the worry is the day in and day out of message opportunity as he and his advisors continue to file suits that aren't going anywhere, aren't going to affect the election. I mean, let's face it, for him to affect the election, he has to turn Georgia, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Arizona. This isn't Bush v. Gore, one state. This is 4 states, and that's just not going to happen.
Yeah. How about you, Mark? I mean, do you see any merit in it? And also from the vantage point of what Karen is articulating?
Well, as I look at the claim,
message platform vehicle.
As I look at the claims, I don't see the merit, nor do I see what it would change, really. As Karen said, one of the suits in Georgia was over 53 votes. That's not going to change anything. At the moment, if I'm not mistaken, what is being raised in Pennsylvania, aside from the observer distance, which was resolved, there were ballots that did not have proper signatures. People have had, I think, until November 9th to correct those. There were some ballots, I think about 600, that weren't in the proper secrecy envelopes. But those aren't numbers to change anything. So I'm not really sure what difference it makes. I think too, and I want to just clarify something I said earlier. I'm not suggesting that half the country is a white supremacist like Trump, but I'm suggesting that half the country voted for one. And if in fact they voted for one based upon the economy, I still think what we have to engage in is to educate people in terms of zero tolerance when it comes to that behavior. And most importantly, that the economy would never have been what it was if COVID had been addressed by a competent administration in the first place. When Barack Obama was president, people threw this word around post-racial, and clearly it was not. I think the term more accurate for Trump's time in office is post-factual. That things are said and promoted on social media in such a way that people make decisions, even in terms of voting for him, that are not really rooted in factual information. And this administration, more than anyone in history, has mastered the use of social media propaganda and disinformation. So to this point on the claims, there are some people out here who think that he shouldn't concede. Even Republicans are saying that think that there's some merit to the case that he should not concede. And that's very, very unfortunate. And unless we figure out a way to reach people with facts and reality, it will take even longer to heal.
Yeah. Now, I remember you're speaking to the states that you were focused on, Mark, were Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania. Before I ask you, I'm going to ask Karen, how is it that Biden was able to bump up the margins and win those states? So, and, you know, as against 2016, was it his policies? Was it his his campaign strategy? Or was it that people just knew him in that part of the world? What do you think of what, Karen?
So, I think it was all of the above. I mean, thankfully, the campaign had their own analytics, and they took Trump at his word. Trump said he was going to get Republicans who had not voted in 2016 out, and they estimated there was anywhere from 2 to 3.5 million voters in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, and they were going after them. And so, unlike the pollsters, I think what Jen O'Malley Dillon did is took him at his word and made sure that the numbers of people that voted for Joe Biden, be they Democrat or independents or Republicans, that it was going to be a plus up well over 2016. When Jen gave a briefing right after the election, which to Mark's point, the day of the election, that next day, I think all of us were down, and she was confident and, not overconfident, but she was confident. And she said, our numbers are there. So their modeling in those 3 states at a minimum was excellent. Look, the number one issue on the issues, as I say, all of the above, I think the issues were if you voted for Biden, you were voting about the coronavirus. And that was your number one issue. And secondly, you were, I think 67% were voting against Trump.
Yeah. Now, Mark, I'm going to ask you about whether you share Karen's thinking as to how got those numbers up. But I also want to ask you about what was a surprise to many, that this time Trump upped his numbers with African Americans, seemingly with men. I think he upped his numbers with Latino voters also, with men. And he ended up still with the majority of white women voters. You want to speak to those points?
Well, the last ones first. I myself, and some may not agree with me, some do actually though, I'm very cautious about the exit poll numbers in terms of numbers that went up, because it is impossible to exit poll 100 million absentee voters. And I think that's what we kind of got. So I don't think that's true. I'm not ready to say that those numbers are accurate. I think the only one that may be accurate may be African American men. But it's a question of what the percentage would be, whether it actually went up to the 18%. And think about it. We know some things for ourselves. Some of those exit polls say that Black women support doubled from 48%. We know that's not true. It also said that 30% of LGBTQIA voters voted for Trump. We know that's not true too. So I think it's going to take some time to flush out those numbers and do some adjustments, seasonal adjustments, if you will, to those numbers. I'm not even sure that the white women's vote went up. We just have to wait to see. In terms of those critical states, obviously the Biden campaign knew what it was doing in those states, but as always, the African-American electorate once again really came through. And that's why he was the first president-elect to say the African-American community has always had his back. and that he now will always have ours. And it's amazing historically how in those critical states that he won, even by a hair, it tracks the African-American experience from Georgia, where we picked cotton, to Pennsylvania, where we escaped on the Underground Railroad, to Michigan and Wisconsin, which African-Americans pioneered even before the Civil War. And then Michigan and Wisconsin again during the Great Migration after World War II. And also, a lot of people forget the Great Migration after World War II included Nevada and Arizona, where African Americans were involved in building the industry in all four of those states. So it was because of our migration, our movement, our peopling those places that we were heard. And in terms of our Latinx sisters and brothers, aside from Florida and some border counties in Texas, the Latino community, the Latinx community in Nevada and Arizona played a pivotal role too. They got it as well in terms of the incredible stakes in this presidential election.
Karen, I want your thoughts on the same rather quickly, because I also want to ask you about how do we have a transition with a president who didn't concede or hasn't conceded?
Certainly, Mayor. I just want to strongly echo what Mark has said. The exit polls are, just very noisy, and in this pandemic, I'm not sure the numbers are even close to what they are. But also, when we say, I'll take white women, there probably is a majority that voted for Trump because there was a majority in 2016, and I think Biden did an excellent job overall on the white vote in bringing it up to numbers above where Hillary had it. But we also have to look at where those votes actually are. So his vote is small city, rural, wealthy, older. So when there's other factors that are driving that vote, I think, and I think, in 2018, we started looking at the exit polls in 2016 and saying, gee, we had made a lot of mistakes. So I'd be really cautious about these numbers. Just reflecting on the transition, because I handled the transition for outgoing President Clinton, and the GSA is a source of funding, ironically, a lease for the exiting president so he can have office space, and a number of other things that have to be done, his pension and what have you. And so clearly they're not doing any of that. I think the Biden team is handling it well. They're just moving on. If GSA doesn't anoint them, that means they don't have an office space. We're in COVID. Nobody has an office space. So, they're not losing anything. They don't get the money from GSA, but again, they've got a campaign fund that they can draw from. I think they've got to stay on message, keep doing the work the way they're doing it. And eventually, this will shake out. The 20th Amendment said he has to go by noon on the 20th of January. So there's no choice after that.
So, Mark, let me just sort of follow up, because we're getting short on time, not just in terms of the transition, but what about a peaceful transition? Romney's been clear, President George W. Bush has been clear in acknowledging that President-elect Biden is in fact the president-elect. And yet, I don't think McConnell or a great many others haven't weighed in. Lindsey Graham has suggested that he should continue to fight. Are you concerned about the environment given that dynamic?
Not at the moment, because they were selling wolf tickets about doing things this weekend, doing things all last week, and nothing has happened. As the younger generation says, I don't think they want any of that smoke. So, because I think people are prepared to respond. There will be a peaceful transition. I mean, I think for the most part, he may kick and scream, But I think that there are too many professionals in the military and the government and Secret Service and at GSA, the director notwithstanding, whose job is probably on the line, who want to keep those jobs and have themselves families to provide for and are not willing to risk their livelihoods participating in Trump's pathology or foolishness. So I think I'm pretty confident that it will go smoothly. I agree with Karen. Rise above it is what the Biden campaign is doing and continue to do it. They have enough money. You're right. There is no such thing as office space. And I think it speaks well of their magnanimity to go forward and continue to put a clean glass next to the dirty glass that is the Trump administration.
Well, I'm certain President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Harris would very much like to get 2 more seats in the Senate. Do you think we have a shot, or the Democrats have a shot at winning those 2 runoff seats on January 5th, Karen?
You know, I think we do, thanks to Stacey Abrams. And I don't think she can be thanked enough for all that she has done. You know, Trump won Georgia by 5 points. So she had to move 5 points and then some. And she did it. You know, there's a question about where the independents will be. You know, are independent voters going to be more concerned about split government than they are about, you know, Democrats running the table? So I think that's a concern, and it's a message opportunity that people have to address. Trump's not going to be on the ballot. So that means probably 2 things. One is, you know, his diehards may not care whether Perdue and Loeffler get in. But it also means, you know, there's a whole lot of people who are voting against him that might not come out. So we've got some energizing to do. But I think Stacey Abrams and her team down there have just done a magnificent job.
You think we can pull it off? The Democrats, rather, I should say, pull it off, Mark?
I don't think we have a choice. In order for the Biden-Harris administration to govern, they need a Senate. Mitch McConnell's already threatened to block cabinet appointments. And I think it's very doable. You know, people don't like to come back out for special elections, we know, but this is close enough it might be possible. After all, mail-in balloting for that January race begins November 18th, that soon. So it's just a question of keeping the momentum going. And Trump may help by not conceding, by blocking the transition. That will keep our troops mobilized and not too stagnant. And again, I'm still going to be easy on white women. You know, Karen talked about, you know, what they may have done, but I see the math doesn't work out for me. If suburban white women left the Republican Party in 2018 and helped the Democrats win the House, why would they go back in 2020? And even Trump didn't believe that because he was whining to them, "Oh, white women, please don't leave me. I need you." He was saying that on the stump. Look at Kelly Loeffler's number in Georgia. She got the least votes of the 2 who made the runoff, Ossoff and Warnock, and even less than Perdue. So if that's true, I think that white women at very important constituency will be with us in Georgia. We know where Black voters are. Stacey Abrams deserves all the credit in the world. This is how you build the new South. This is how you change the South. What she began several years ago is what Jamie Harrison has just begun. So who knows, in a few years, maybe we'll have South Carolina too. But I think we can win that race, and we must come January. All roads lead to Georgia right now.
Well, it's stimulating. It will be interesting to see whether there will be a new South. I dare say everybody's eyes will be on it, Republicans, most assuredly, as well as Democrats. Karen and Mark, as always, you have been terrific, providing insights about this very interesting, compelling election. And we do need to continue to drill down on what are the undercurrents that are upending our society so that to some extent we are splintered for what may be a variety of reasons. But thank you both so very much, and thank our IPPH On Air audience. And if you want to continue to follow us, you can at Instagram and Facebook, Politics, Policy, History, at Politics, Policy, History. And at Twitter, it's at Politics, Policy 1. Thank you so very, very much. And until next Monday at 3, this is State of Play.